Now, on to Lydia. She is an impressive person in the book of Acts. I can see three ways that Lydia is worth studying, in ways that she showed godly leadership. So those are my three subpoints. First, she is an industrious woman. Industrious. Verse 14 says she's a seller of purple goods. So right now, you can go to the store and buy anything purple, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're wealthy. It would be like buying white or green or red or anything else. In fact, anybody wearing purple today? I see a couple. I see one there. We got a few purple. There, I see you. You didn't raise your hand. I see you. We got a couple purples in the audience today. But in ancient times, the color purple symbolized wealth. It symbolized power. It symbolized royalty because it was so expensive, only royalty could buy it. So it was difficult to make. That's why, supply demand. That's why there was a very specific sea creature. Y'all are going to feel bad about this. There was a very specific sea creature called a murex that had to be harvested and squeezed for its small amount of purple dye. Only wealthy people could afford this process. And so it came to represent great means, right? So in those days, Barney the dinosaur would have been like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk combined. So I read deep in a commentary this week that this is something you never need to know, but in the area of Thyatira where Lydia was from, there wasn't really coastal access. And so it's likely that she was involved in the production of an early purple knockoff product that could be made from a plant root called the mudder root. Not a father, but a mudder. Now, around this time in history, they began to develop an ability to have purple dye go out to the masses using a root that they found in the ground, and they could, grow it, and it wasn't like squeezing a sea creature. So it's very possible Lydia, because they traced it to this time when it started to happen. So it is very possible, and I think that Lydia was possibly on the cutting edge of this new market, and she became very wealthy. It was already a wealthy thing to have, but I think it's even possible that she was on the edge of a new market to where your normal average person could get purple, and it started to go nuts. That's just my personal opinion. We also see later that she has a family. She's over a household. Now, they would not likely say that in the Bible if there was a husband present. So certainly in these days, there would have been a husband mentioned if there was one. So I think, again, that Lydia was an example, a rare example of a widow in Bible times who was able to financially support herself after her husband passed away. So in verse 40, we read that a church was even gathering in her home. It says her home. And of course, this is another educated guess, but Philippians 4, which was when Paul wrote later to this exact area, Paul said that only one church entered into a financial partnership with him and sent him money on the mission field. Which one was it? The Philippian church. So again, I think that Lydia was possibly a significant financier of Paul's gospel ministry. She was an industrious woman. Secondly, Lydia took, number 2 on her subpoints, initiative. She took initiative in her spiritual life. Paul's typical pattern was to go to where on the Sabbath? The synagogues, okay? He didn't go to the synagogue. He went to the river. Why? Well, we can assume that if he didn't go there, they didn't have one. It required 10 Jewish males to launch a new synagogue, and apparently there wasn't enough to do that. And so he tries a new idea. He goes to the river because, this is a great guess, Jews would often wash they had these cleansing rituals and rites, and so they would often go to the river for prayer and things like that. And so he assumed that if there was a ragtag group of Jews, they might be down at the river. And they were on the Sabbath. So he went there. A group of women are there worshiping God, and Lydia is among them. And though she had no husband, she had no male leadership apparently in her life. There wasn't a synagogue that had been formed. She did not let that stop her from worshiping God. Lydia was not a damsel in distress character. In the absence of male leadership around her, she filled the gap and led herself and possibly other women. Now, I believe God made men to lead. God built men for the task of being leaders in the home and in the church. This is the design. When it's subverted, God's not happy. But I also got to be honest and say, Christianity in the history of missions owes a great gratitude to women who stepped up in obedience to God's call. There's a joke among missionaries, and it's only a joke if it's not true, right? So I don't know if this is just true. It goes something like this. 2/3 of all missionaries on the field are married couples. The other third is single women. The rest are single men. Again, it's not even really a joke. So Lydia was not a missionary, but she was a worshiper of the true God. When there was no one else to lead her family, she led herself and her family. Some of you ladies may have to empathize with that, to know what it's like to have to seek the Lord on your own without the support of a husband, to train up your children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord alone, to train your children in the Lord's ways by yourself, to have to lean on your church family for spiritual discussions because maybe you have a husband and you just don't get that at home. Just know the Lord is honored in your perseverance and your labor is not in vain. It's not an ideal situation. You're fighting with one hand tied behind your back. And I pray that our church can come alongside you and be a stability to you and your family because we have, I don't know if you see every time we have an ordination here, a lot of great godly men at Kirby Woods. Paul saw these women gathered at the river worshiping God. Like Jesus at the well, he went right in. He approached and had a gospel conversation. Lydia heard the words of Paul on the banks of the river. Now, she was a bright, industrious lady. We've said that. But on this day, listen, it was not her intellect, it was not her money that saved her. Verse 14 says, the Lord opened her heart, and she believed the gospel. She believed that Jesus was the Christ, that he died on the cross to make payment for sins, that he rose from the dead, he conquered the grave, and he extends his arms to any who would call upon his name for forgiveness. That's what she believed if she believed the gospel. So they were already at the river. Verse 15 says that they just went ahead and get baptized right there. There's a river. Not only did she personally believe and obey, then we hear that she took the message where? Home. She took the message home, and her entire household was baptized. Her first thought as a good mother was, hey, you know what? I got kids at home. I got a family back home. They need to hear this. She didn't make that foolish mistake that many modern parents make today by saying, I'm not going to raise my children to believe a certain way. I'm going to raise them neutrally, and then when they get old enough, they'll make their own decision. I love you. That's dumb. Don't do that. Don't do that. The world's going to put the answers in their heads if you don't. So Lydia went and told the gospel to her family immediately, baptized, boom, went home, went to see her family, and then the family was baptized. She was industrious. She took initiative. Lastly, she illustrated her faith. She illustrated her faith. That's subpoint number 3, illustrated. Verse 15 says that after she was baptized, her household as well, she urged us, saying, if you've judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come to my house and stay. And she prevailed upon us. Now, that kind of reads a little strangely, I admit. So let me paraphrase. She said to the mission team, if you want to see my new faith in action, come let my hospitality show you that my faith is real. And I love that last line. She prevailed upon us. That's a woman who wasn't taking no for an answer. She wanted to show Paul and the team this was real in her heart. They said, we really got to be hitting the road. And she said, stay. Okay. And so they stayed. Now, look, there are other people that would come to faith on this missionary journey, this second journey. Lydia is not the only person who came to faith on this journey, but one cannot help see what Luke did in the juxtaposition of this text. He clearly combines the gospel going to another continent versus the gospel going to one woman. And again, there will be others saved. Philippian jailer is next week. But the first convert to Christ in Europe was Lydia, a woman that God sought out. Asia, no. Bithynia, no. East, north, no. Lydia. That's interesting. It's almost as God says, I know you wanted to go east, I know you wanted to go north, but I got Lydia on my mind. Never underestimate the value of one person to God and his mission. When God sets his affections on you, he would move heaven and earth to see you become a son or a daughter. Paul and company meandered all around Asia Minor, being pushed and pulled by the Spirit of God, prevented, blocked, sent visions in the night, all to end up in Philippi at a riverside to preach to a woman who was sitting there waiting for them.